Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here coming to you with the next Canadian politics video. Today we're covering, I think, the most prominent and most important story in federal politics in Canada, the recent throne speech and whether we're going to see an election. Now, as you can see by this article I have queued up from the global news, that it looks like it's going to pass. So, here's what we know right now. The Conservatives have categorically said they're not going to vote for it. Essentially, their statement is Trudeau government has failed to handle COVID very seriously. Their ethics scandals are a pretty big deal, and they're doing a terrible job managing the recovery. And this throne speech does not inspire any confidence that they're going to change that. The Bloc's basically going to say no because they're demanding $28 billion in federal healthcare transfers to the provinces, and that's not going to happen. So it came down to the NDP. And there was a lot of kerfuffing and guffawing on Singh's part, being like, oh, the throne speech doesn't really have what we want in it. It's not doing a good job. He was condemning about prorogue earlier and Trudeau's handling of scandal and all these other things. So there was for a while, for a couple days here, the idea that an election is theoretically possible because Singh seems to be sitting on the fence. He's keeping himself the option to contest it and to force an election. However, since then, we see on the 24th here that there was a deal made between Singh and Trudeau about sick leave and unemployment benefits, and we also see here from Lethbridge News that on the 25th that they had officially reached a deal on these two things. Now, I haven't seen any other update to this, so this is just where it seems to be right now. It looks like Singh is making a deal with Trudeau on this. Now, on its face, I think this makes sense for the NDP because really the NDP's claim to purpose, because the probability of the NDP winning an election is almost to zero. There has been a few times, like 2011, when they've come close, but it's pretty low. Not the chance that they would win any given election and be driving government policy. So the two claims to fame are basically, or claims that of purpose. Claim to purpose is that they can create private members' bills for people who are more concerned about more left-wing policy, union issues, and nowadays environmental concerns. Sorry, left-wing environmental concern, that they're going to push more of that in private members' bills, that they will fight to negotiate on bills, particularly in minority governments, to make them more fit their goals more. And in general, the NDP's done a good job at that, which is why the NDP continues to exist and ride this 20 to 40 seat range that they seem to generally sit in. Though occasionally, with a charismatic leader, when the Liberals are running a terrible leader, like 2011, the NDP can explode and actually get a ton of seats. I think that was 102, that's what they got in 2011. Unfortunately for them, Jack Layton then died, and 2015 was Trudeau coming in with a red wave, which makes it hard on that's the biggest issue the NDP's actually really always had in Canadian politics, is the Liberal Party sets themselves more centrist, so they appeal to more voters, generally. But here's where the danger comes with Singh propping up Trudeau. So Trudeau is progressively getting more and more unpopular. Like, his popularity peaks when, because when you're doing popular approval rating polling, it kind of like goes up and down like this. So you might have a trend going like that, or you might have a trend going like this. So like, I'm trying to do the motions with my mouse because I don't have hands to show you. I don't have a camera. So there's peaks and troughs to it, and every peak Trudeau seems to be hitting seems to be smaller than what you would expect it to be, because he's continuing to pile on more and more ethics scandals, bad management, concerns that he's not really up for the job. These are piling more and more on, and he's eroding the swing votes. So the two classic swing votes that the Liberals have are the NDP to Liberal voter and the Conservative to Liberal voter. And the political spectrum is more complicated than that, because you have a lot of ridings where you have swing NDP to Conservative voters. These are people who primarily vote on union issue, but sometimes NDP is too left-wing, so they vote Conservative kind of thing. So it's more complicated, but to simplify it down, we have the NDP Liberal swing voter and the Liberal Conservative swing voter. And progressively here, Trudeau's been losing the Liberal to Conservative swing voter. We saw that in 2019, where he lost a bunch of ground to the Conservatives that he gained in 2015. And I think we're going to see what he's doing now, because he's been losing also since 2019 the Liberal NDP swing voters, because he's basically failing at everything he's promised. Now, I will give him some slack, as much as it pains me. He did get hit by a giant random pandemic that no one expected, but even that said, even a lot of his promises he made in 2015, he just completely drops, like electoral reform being the worst one. Planting trees, he's barely planted any trees. I don't think that actually was a 2015 promise, but that took him a couple years under majority government to implement weed legalization, which was a big election promise for him. So he's not been very good at this, holding these promises. So he's progressively losing the NDP Liberal swing voters. And this is where Singh gets in trouble. So Singh has a really tough game to navigate here. He has to actually push these policies that NDP, what's the word for this? The potential NDP voter wants. But if he pushes the potential NDP voter agenda under Trudeau in a minority government, Trudeau often gets the credit for it. And that's really true more broadly with any NDP Liberal minority government. The NDP will push a policy and the Liberals will adopt it to prevent an election, and the Liberals get the credit and the NDP doesn't. We saw that in 1972 with the Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the NDP then, where the NDP pushed a lot of policies that Trudeau benefited from, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, to be specific, but benefited from, and the NDP didn't, and the NDP got decimated in the next election. And I think we're getting into a situation where we're going to see a very similar thing happen here, where Singh is supporting Trudeau. In return, he's getting a bunch of things that the NDP want. But a lot of the grassroots support for the NDP are progressively not liking Trudeau himself. So you get this weird dilemma where he kind of has to push for these policies, but at the same time, a lot of his base is not liking Trudeau. To be fair, that's more of an anecdotal comment from me because I know a lot of people who are NDP voters who don't like Trudeau, or are NDP Liberal swing voter who don't like Trudeau a lot and wouldn't vote for Trudeau in an election. But so for this group of voters, I can't really say how many of them there are, but they exist. I've talked to many. By supporting Trudeau really heavily, he's affiliating the NDP with Trudeau, which makes it harder on him. Whereas, not supporting Trudeau, he gets the people who are the NDP voters, potential voters who are open to voting Trudeau. He gets them upset because he's not pushing for these policies. And we get this. So in a way, really, the NDP gets out better in a conservative minority government than a liberal minority government because a lot of the NDP potential voters, when the Conservatives end up passing, when a conservative government passes NDP-friendly policy, NDP potential voters don't think, oh yes, the Conservatives did this. They think, the NDP pushed it. Whereas the Liberals, not left to the devices of Singh, or the NDP pushing for it, are going to pass really similar things. Like the unemployment benefit change was from 400 to 500, and Singh claims he pushed for it, and that's what he got. Trudeau says that didn't happen. Or I think that was actually the Liberal House leader, but same difference in this regard. The Liberal Party claims, no, we were going to do that anyways, and Singh claims, no, I pushed for it and we got it. Similar thing with with his push for sick leave. It's not an inconceivable policy that the Liberals could have done themselves. And sure, maybe Singh did push for it. Let's give Singh the benefit of the doubt here. His pushing actually got it done. And the sick leave is actually happening. Well, then he has the difficulty of trying to sell that to people. And he has a difficulty trying to sell that to people while showing that even though all of these bad things Trudeau's done, such as scandal or other previous scandals and proroguing government, shutting down Parliament over the summer, over COVID really, how we're seeing another spike come up. And I mean, to be fair, we're a federal system. The federal government's only purpose in handling a health crisis like this is to provide resources. It's not to set policy that is provincial level. Federal level just provides the resources to the provinces and the people. But we're seeing rising COVID cases. We're seeing his bad management of the economy, of scandals, and all these other things that are big cons that are hitting Trudeau right now, which is why he's not spiking in polling, if that makes sense. Because I'll get to this in a second here. But the polling in a second, I should say. But well, maybe I'll say that to another video later this week. I'll save that for the Wednesday video. But what we're seeing is Singh's getting himself stuck in a very difficult position. And a position I do not envy, because he has to simultaneously push for NDP policy while not supporting the Trudeau government too long. And if he doesn't play that calculus right, and he supports it one too many confidence votes long, he's going to be the one that gets hurt. And, well, again, it'll come up a bit in the the election model update on Wednesday, but just to give a brief discussion, it looks like right now that NDP polling numbers are going down while Conservative and Liberal are going up, which, in general terms, since we have a finite number of voters, to be fair, there's also turnout numbers, so like a group that wouldn't ever vote NDP might be turning out more relative to ones that would vote NDP, but in a very simplified one-dimensional spectrum, which any political buff in the political, I don't want to say political science because I feel like I don't like the term, but I guess, poli-sci buff in the audience would cringe at this one-dimensional simplification of politics, but if we simplify it to 1D margin, what this means is the Conservatives are chewing away at the right wing of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party is chewing at the left wing of the NDP and Green Party. And I think you're also seeing, actually, that the Conservatives are chewing away at the right wing of the bloc. And possibly... I think it's just one way. I think the Conservatives are eating part of the bloc right now, depending on the poll you look at. Polling in Quebec is kind of wild right now, in a way. Like, depending on the poll, you'll see Liberals up a lot, Bloc up a lot, Bloc down a lot, Liberals down a lot, Conservatives up a lot. So it's kind of wild. I should note, not that Conservatives are ever leading in Quebec, but there's a big difference between Conservatives being polled at like 12% and being polled at like 18 or 20. But to cycle this all back, and I guess to summarize the whole video here, because I'm trying to keep these videos shorter now, the NDP's in a tough position. And on a NDP level, personally I disagree with this position, but as a strategic goal for the NDP, I think it does make sense for Singh to support this non-confidence vote. But he's putting himself in a dangerous position, because the more of these votes that he supports the Liberals through, the harder it is for him to honestly say that the NDP's different than Liberals. And that matters a lot in these ridings that are NDP conservative swing, like British Columbia, a lot of British Columbia's coast, for example, is like the prime area that's NDP conservative swing. There's some places in northern Ontario and Manitoba, which I would say are conservative NDP swing, but it's really the coast of British Columbia where this matters a lot. Like northern Vancouver Island in the north coast. It gets really difficult to sell to voters who are open to voting conservative. Often these are people who are, what's the best word to phrase this? They have conservative values but are really concerned about union issues. So they vote NDP because they don't trust how the Conservatives will handle unions. That's a very, very, very oversimplification of it, but that's a very common type of voter that exists. I know several. And it's dangerous for the NDP to get in that position, because they can lose a lot of seats to the Conservatives, and by proxy cause a Conservative government to come into power, which I actually think is still better for the NDP than a Liberal minority government, but I could see how someone who's very left-wing might think it's worse, because they'd rather have a lukewarm leftist than a right-winger in power. Or lukewarm's not a great way to phrase it, because the Liberal Party is definitely left-wing, but like they would rather Trudeau than a generic right-winger, in this case Erin O'Toole. I can certainly respect that, but I think in the actual Canadian political system they're wrong. But so I guess Singh has a really terrible task for him. He has to balance between the people who would be the NDP voters who are open to voting Conservative or Green or just not voting. And these are generally people who don't like Trudeau but like NDP policy. And don't like Liberal policy, I should note. And the people who like Trudeau but like NDP policy more. He has to try to balance between those two groups to stay relevant. And I think that's where he did a really bad job in 2019 election compared to Thomas Mulcair in 2015. Obviously, Thomas Mulcair had more seats to start with, so he had more room to lose. And the Conservatives did relatively bad in that election, and so did the Bloc. But the important thing here is that the NDP because of how the party's target demographics is and who they votes for them, has a really tough time. And I think Singh is maneuvering himself in a position where, if he's not careful, when the election finally happens, the NDP is going to get wrecked. I think, because there's been some talk about Singh maybe supporting the government all the way to 2023 when the scheduled election would take place. I think if he did that, what you would see is the left wing of the NDP would defect to the Green Party. The NDP voters who like Trudeau would just vote Trudeau because they're like, well, he just does everything Trudeau says he's going to do anyway, so might as well actually have a solid majority that's safe. That said, I don't know if there's actually many NDP people who voted NDP in 2019 who were open to voting Liberal who didn't already vote Liberal, but there might be some left. You're going to have some NDP voters who are probably just going to stay home because they're like, what's the point of voting? And you'll have NDP voters in places like northern Manitoba, northern Ontario. The rural ridings the NDP controls, I guess is more specifically. Rural NDP ridings, you'll see a lot of them defect to Conservative Party. Or the Greens. The Greens are going to a 2023 election with NDP supporting Trudeau the whole way, what I think you're going to see is in PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, NDP's gone. The Green Party sucks up everything left. The Green Party and Conservatives suck up everything, and the NDP's gone in those provinces more or less. You saw that in the most recent NDP election, New Brunswick election, where the NDP provincially was wiped out, basically. And when I say wiped out, they had no seats, but they only got 1% of the votes, which is effectively gone, like the party is destroyed. I think the NDP will still exist in British Columbia, but I could totally see them getting wiped out in Alberta and Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba even. It's Ontario for sure. It's a very dangerous position to be in. So, well, I don't think we're going to see the election now because of this deal. I think the budget of next March/April, I think that's Singh's chance. I think if Singh doesn't pull the election then, barring some wild circumstance like, I don't know, Ebola, like pandemic outbreak or some crazy shenanigans like that, like even if COVID's still a thing, I think by the time we hit March 2021, we'll have a firm grasp on it that anyone complaining about voting during the pandemic is just fear-mongering. We'll have had at least 3 Canadian elections by then, queuing up for probably a 4th in Nova Scotia, if not others. So, I think the Trudeau government survived now, but I bet a lot of money. March or April 2021, whenever that confidence vote happens for the budget, I don't think the budget's passing. And barring some major win for Trudeau where he turns this around, I don't know if he's going to win. I don't think he's going to win the election. And I think if Singh plays his cards right, because he has the chance here, if he's savvy enough, that he could gain a lot of ground at the Liberals' expense. But I don't know if he will. But we'll see. If you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe. Comment below if you have any thoughts on how the NDP, and specifically Singh, has to play his really tough balancing game going forward. Or let me know your thoughts on how a potential 2021 election is going to look like. Obviously, I'll be continuing to update my election predictions every week now, but that said, hope you all have a good day. It's gray outside, but that's like it always is in Maritimes. So, have a good day, everybody.